On that note, so our next segment is gonna be pretty devastating. I'm sorry. I'm sure some of you guys have already heard this in the news, and yeah, it's truly tragic what happened. And I'm talking about the situation that happened to young Cannon, a 5-year-old who was murdered by I believe, 25-year-old African American. And there's a lot of controversy surrounding this, and I want to just throw out what I think about it. My thoughts on this and what I'm seeing, the potential pitfalls and distractions that this particular incident is causing us, and basically how we can come together using this situation rather than further drive a wedge between each other. And before we get into that, for those of you guys who are just tuning in, first of all, welcome to the Deviant Core Podcast. And if you want to watch the video, full length videos, go ahead and head on over to our Facebook, the Deviant Core Podcast. Subscribe and like our page, and then join our group, the Deviant Core Podcast group, to get access to the full length and not just clips on a page. You can also go to our YouTube at the Deviant Core Podcast. Go ahead and subscribe to our page. Go ahead and like the video and support us any way, shape you can. And really, we're just looking for you to share the video and like it. That's it. Spread the word, baby. That's all I want, right? For you guys who want to listen to the full-length episode, we're also on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, we're on Overcast, and Stitcher. So go ahead and check us out there at the Deviant Core Podcast. Now, let's talk about the situation, because this actually really hurt my heart. Just more senseless violence that we should really be all going to the opposite direction. But in this day and age where people are in the most stressful position, where people are in tough spots, it's getting to the point where, yeah, things are getting pretty crazy out there now. Things are getting pretty weird, and we have to prepare, because people are getting dangerous. You can't even trust your neighbors anymore. So let's get into this. The family of Cannon Hinnant, I'm mispronouncing the name here, will never get over the loss of their little boy. The 5-year-old was shot and killed by a neighbor while riding his bike in Wilson, North Carolina. Last weekend, according to police. We shouldn't even be here, Cannon's grandfather said. He told ABC News that Cannon was the type of kid that will always be polite, laid back, and he was a beautiful little kid. Cannon's family said that they were preparing to send him to kindergarten, which was set to start this week, but instead they spent their time receiving the more than 100 cars who arrived for his funeral. That's sad. 5-year-old who knew what his future could have been, ripped from us. He was a loving child. He loved going to church. He lit up many rooms he walked into. I mean, any store we're in, he would just talk to a stranger. Austin Hinnant, Cannon's father, told ABC News. Hinnant said that the tragedy began as a normal day. They all wanted to go ride their bikes and enjoy Sunday afternoon, just like any other kid. 30 minutes later, said Hinnant, he heard the gunshots. He said he ran out to his front door. The first thing I see is my son laying on the ground, and it crossed my mind that maybe he just fell off his bike. As I got closer to him and scooped him up in my arms, I realized how horrific it was. I had to scoop my son up and hold him in my arms as blood ran down my arm. On all I could do was pray to God, said Hinnant. Cannon's 2 sisters were there, witnessed the tragic event. It's been very tough for my 2 daughters, says Hinnant. The young boy's killing has garnered international attention from people around the world. Have been using several hashtags related to Cannon's death on social media to send prayers, words of encouragement, and donations to his family. The alleged shooter, I'm not even gonna say his name, what a scumbag, was arrested Monday after fleeing the scene, and now is in jail without bond, facing first-degree murder charge. Wilson police said it's unclear when his next day in court would be. We've been neighbors for 8 years, Hinnant told ABC News. We had just been cordial neighbors like anyone else. We would speak when we saw one another, and he may walk over and talk to me for a few moments, vice versa. On Saturday, the day before the fatal shooting, Kenneth's father had Sensums over for dinner. That's the guy. Hinnant told ABC News that they shared a beer together on the porch. and his demeanor seemed fine. But he said Sessom also seemed paranoid about an event that happened Friday night. He looked like he had a lot on his mind, and I was cooking in the kitchen. I was cooking chicken on a grill, so I invited him in over into my home. We were supporters of God, and I just told him that God tells us to love our neighbors, said Hinnant. The family says they intend to hold a vigil in the near future, but it's taking time now to mourn and heal. That is crazy. That is nuts. That shouldn't have happened. Bad things do not deserve to happen to good people, but unfortunately it does. And that's the thing. And for those of you guys who are just tuning in, this young man and his family, first of all, he did not deserve to be murdered the way he was. He really did not deserve what happened to him. And it turns out that the guy who did the murder was arrested, and he's going to be facing first-degree murder charges. But here's the thing. What I'm seeing now, especially on social media, we're seeing this young man, the situation, the circumstances surrounding the thing that happened, the tragedy that happened to this young man, is being used right now as a political tool of hate. We got two sides right now where people who are on one hand comparing this to what happened to George Floyd. And for those of you guys, I'm sure, unless you've been sleeping under a rock, you know what happened with the whole George Floyd incident. A black man who was murdered by a white police officer, right? And in this case, with Cannon, it was a white child murdered by a black man. Now, what I see, and a lot of people should be taking the time and pausing and paying attention, is, first of all, these two situations are two completely different things, two completely different scenarios. And I think it is absolutely disingenuous to try to make a comparison solely on the base of race. Now, people are saying, well, Drew, what are you talking about? Well, a lot of people are wondering, okay, well, why isn't getting this a whole lot of media attention? And that is true, right? And I'm glad that a lot of people are slowly starting to wake up to the media manipulation that is going on. On one hand, one story is being pumped up, right? One story being flared. On the other hand, one story isn't getting as much attraction, right? But the one thing people are failing or are doing right now and failing to understand, that you can't compare apples to oranges here, all right? You have to judge these two incidents on their own right, because otherwise you're just judging it based off of race. Here's what I mean by that, right? We're pissed off that George Floyd died, and there were mass nationwide protests and riots going on with that, right? That came with it, and it was awful. And now the issue with George Floyd is that, let's just be real, this stuff has been happening to people like George Floyd for years, right? When you see a protest, riot break out in the manner that it did, that means that something like this has been happening for years to those specific communities. And not even just those communities, but to people who are economically disadvantaged. Just being real. I've lived in poor neighborhoods. I've seen poor Hispanic people. I've seen poor white people with the boot of the government on their necks. With the boot of the government on their necks. Meaning, if you don't have economic resource, if you're not economically important or valuable, the government puts their knee on your neck, just like they did with George Floyd. In that scenario, we're talking about police brutality. We're talking about the government abusing their power on innocent civilians. That's what we're talking about. In this situation with Cannon, judging it based on itself, the individual situation that happened. Let's look back into the story, right? The father, the day before the murder happened, noticed that there was a change in this man's demeanor and behavior and his mental state. He was paranoid. You know what was going on, right? So invited him over, had a beer, and tried to make him feel better, which is the neighborly thing that you can do. And before you know it, this man murdered a 5-year-old. Now, the reason why this is different, because you don't have a natural occurring history of black people or black men murdering white kids. white 5-year-olds. There isn't a huge slew of repeated offenses of black people murdering white kids. You don't see that, right? The most common thing you see is police officers shooting and abusing black people or just poor, economically disadvantaged people. It doesn't even have to be color. And it's really not a color thing, a whole lot. Most of it is, but a piece of it isn't. It's just if you're broke, if you're powerless, you're going to be abused by someone who has power because they know you don't have those resources to defend yourself against the state. In this case, you had a man who's dealing with some shit and decided to murder a 5-year-old child. So don't make that comparison on why there's not a national riot or national protest about this and compare it to the George Floyd thing. Because some of the posts I've seen out there, it's ridiculous, and it doesn't justify that because they're two different scenarios. You're comparing two different things, and what that does is divide us because it puts everyone else in their own corners now. Everyone's like, oh, well, this kid, why is this story not being shared? And let's just be real. Out of any other example that you could have chose, there are plenty of examples of black cops shooting white people, white men. Literally, if you want to make an apples to apple comparison, there are plenty of black cops and stories of black cops shooting white men. So I agree with you. Why isn't the media making a big fuss about it? Why isn't the media making a big fuss about that? So I agree with you on that, but don't compare this. Because when a black cop murders a white man, that's the same thing as a white cop murdering a black man. So we can compare those two. We can say, okay, why is the media not talking about this issue, this situation, versus now they're talking about this situation? Like the situation with the, I forgot this guy's name, but it was a guy who got murdered for answering the door at late at night when the cops showed up, right? He can't answer the door with a gun, and the cops shot him within 3 seconds. That's a problem. That's something that we should be talking about. That's an apples to apples comparison. And you know what that the uniting factor of is? The uniting factor is the state is killing us. Whether you're white or black, the state is killing you. So that's a common problem. With this guy that murdered a 5-year-old, first of all, a couple things, because I don't like to be rash in my judgments, right? They said this guy had a paranoid thing going on before he pulled the stunt that he pulled, as tragic as it was. Let's also understand that we are in the age of everyone's talking about mental illness. So, right, I've seen situations, and I don't want to get into the fray, but I'm going to just point this out. I've seen situations where there maybe a young white kid goes into a church and shoots everyone else and gets treated a certain way versus the opposite happens, right? Okay, maybe he had mental issues. Maybe he had this. Maybe his parents were. So we try to explore all the other aspects of that rather than going after the particular race and color of that kid that shot up a church. And those of you know what I'm talking about, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So we don't focus on the race there. So for me, I'm not going to focus on just purely the race in that situation. Those of you guys who are following and focusing purely on the race in that situation, that tells you where your priorities lie. But when I look at that, I say, okay, this person, does he have a history of mental illness? Does he have a history of any kind of issue whatsoever? I want to know what happened that made him paranoid. That's what I want to know. That day that Cannon's dad invited him over for a beer and grilled out with him. I want to know what was going through his mind to make someone react that way. And you know what? If it turns out that this person isn't crazy or doesn't have any mental issues whatsoever, well, guess what? Turn off the lights. That's right. Get rid of them. Scumbags like that who kill children don't deserve to walk amongst the normal people around here. So I'm well in support of that. Get rid of that. And guess what? He was arrested and charged immediately. So that's another big distinction between those two stories. So rather than you guys sharing things like that to further divide yourself into corners, let's just find things that unify us, for example. For example, is, hey, the media is complete on some BS right now. That's a unifying subject. Police brutality against American citizens. I don't care about the color. That's a unifying force. So let's start focusing on the things that put us together than the things that drive us apart. Everyone right now watching this video and listening to this podcast, you guys will agree with me that the murder of this 5-year-old boy, this young boy who had so much ahead of him, was wrong. Was absolutely wrong. We can all agree to that. So let's all come together for this young man and the tough situation that his family is going to end up going through. Let's come together for the family and not allow ourselves to be used as political pawns, because that's what this is. Allow the media to further drive a wedge between the people. Let's just honor the family and their loss. Let's spend that time doing that. Let's focus on the unifying force. Let's be disciplined enough to focus on the unifying force. None of the separation stuff, because we're in a time period right now where we cannot afford to be further divided. We're heading in some dangerous territory, and we cannot afford to be further divided. So we got to start figuring out ways to work on this. And that's my 2 cents on it. I just want to throw that out there because of how horrible the situation is. And no family deserves to go through anything like that. This gentleman was sick, and I hope they get the justice they deserve. In this case, it looks like they're going to go get it. And I hope this guy gets, if we figured out, come to find out, he's not crazy. And because you don't just snap and kill a 5-year-old. You don't just, I'm sorry, that's not something you do unless there's something seriously wrong with you. So we got to figure that crap out first. What's going on? And if it turns out, hey, you were just having a bad day, but you took it out on a 5-year-old kid and pull his brains out, well, guess what? You got to go. You got to turn off the lights, buddy. It's over with. It's over with. You don't do that in a society. That's against the rules. It's against the rules. You broke the rules. Simple as that. Get rid of them. And that's my 2 cents on that. So for those